In December 2012, two Formula One champions met in secret at the Ferrari factory in Italy. One was terrified about the biggest decision of his career. The other was about to face a tragedy that would change everything. That night, Lewis Hamilton whispered something in Michael Schumacher's ear that made the seven-time world champion cry. Michael promised he would never forget those words. 14 days later, Michael's skiing accident left him fighting for his life. For years, the world wondered if he would ever remember anything again. But there was one promise he had to keep, one secret that would take 11 years to fully reveal. This is the true story of friendship, sacrifice, and the words that proved being fast is nothing compared to being human. The cold December wind whistled through the empty streets of Maranello, Italy. Christmas lights twinkled in shop windows, but the famous Ferrari factory stood dark and quiet. It was past midnight on December 15, 2012. Most people were home sleeping, but not Lewis Hamilton. Lewis walked slowly toward the red gates of Ferrari. His hands shook, but not from the cold. Tomorrow, the whole world would know his big secret. He was leaving McLaren to join Mercedes. It was the biggest risk of his life. Security guard opened the gate. "Mr. Hamilton? He's waiting for you in garage number 3. Lewis nodded and walked inside. The Ferrari factory felt like a church at night. Tall ceilings, shadows everywhere. The smell of motor oil and dreams filled the air. His footsteps echoed as he walked past rows of red race cars. Each one told a story of speed and glory. Lewis had always wondered what it felt like to drive for Ferrari. Now he would never know. "Lewis! Over here!" The voice came from the back of the garage. Lewis saw a tall figure standing next to a beautiful red car. It was Michael Schumacher, the greatest driver who ever lived. 7 world championships, 91 race wins, a living legend. "Michael," Lewis said quietly, "thank you for meeting me so late." Michael smiled and shook Lewis's hand. Even at 43 years old, Michael still looked strong. His green eyes were kind but sharp, like a wise teacher who had seen everything. "No problem, Lewis. I heard about your move to Mercedes. That takes courage." Lewis looked down at his feet. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy. McLaren gave me everything. They made me a champion in 2008. Now I'm leaving for a team that hasn't won anything in years." Michael laughed softly. "You know what? I did the same thing once. I left Benetton to join Ferrari in 1996. People said I was stupid too. But you won 5 championships with Ferrari." "Yes, but not right away. I lost for 4 years first. 4 long, hard years. The press called me a failure. Fans booed me. I almost quit racing." Lewis looked surprised. Michael Schumacher almost quit? It seemed impossible. "Really? Really? Sometimes the best victories come after the hardest defeats," Michael said. He put his hand on Lewis's shoulder. "Come on. Let me show you something special." They walked deeper into the garage. Michael turned on a bright light. There, sitting like a red jewel, was the most beautiful race car Lewis had ever seen. "This is the F2004, Michael said with pride. "The car that won me my 7th championship. We won 13 races that year. It was perfect." Lewis walked around the car slowly. He touched the smooth red paint. The car seemed to glow under the lights. "I was 35 when I drove this car," Michael continued. "People said I was too old, that younger drivers would beat me. But age doesn't matter if you still have fire in your heart." "Do you miss it?" Lewis asked. "Racing, I mean." Michael was quiet for a moment. He looked at his old car with sad eyes. Every day. But retirement gives you time to think. Time to understand what really matters. He turned to Lewis. Do you know what really matters, Lewis? Lewis thought hard. Winning? No. Money? No. Fame? Michael shook his head. Family, friends, the people who love you when you're slow and old and forgotten. That's what matters. They sat down on two old tire warmers. The garage was so quiet they could hear their own breathing. Tell me about your family, Michael said. Lewis's face lit up. My dad, Anthony. He gave up everything for my racing. Worked 3 jobs. Sold his house. Never missed a race. He's my hero. What about your real father? Lewis froze. His smile disappeared. What do you mean? Michael looked confused. I'm sorry. I heard that Anthony adopted you when you were young. I didn't mean to. Lewis stood up quickly. His hands were shaking again. Who told you that? Lewis, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. I heard it from someone at McLaren years ago. I thought you knew. Lewis felt like the world was spinning. Anthony Hamilton wasn't his real father? How could that be? Anthony was there when Lewis took his first steps. Taught him to drive. Cheered at every race. I don't understand, Lewis whispered. Michael stood up and put his arm around Lewis. I'm sorry, my friend. Maybe I heard wrong. Maybe it's just a rumor. But Lewis knew it wasn't a rumor. Suddenly, many things made sense. Why he looked different from his family. Why Anthony never talked about Lewis's baby years. Why there were no photos of Lewis as a tiny child. My whole life is a lie, Lewis said. Tears filled his eyes. No, Michael said firmly. Your life is not a lie. Anthony Hamilton raised you. He loved you. He made you who you are. That makes him your real father in every way that counts. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Lewis looked up at Michael. Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone? Of course. Lewis took a deep breath. I'm scared about Mercedes. What if I fail? What if I never win another championship? What if everyone remembers me as the driver who threw away his career for nothing? Michael smiled. You know what I learned in my 4 bad years at Ferrari? Failure doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. And wise drivers become great drivers. But what if I'm not strong enough? You are. You know how I know? How? Because you're here. At midnight. In a cold garage. Talking to an old retired driver instead of celebrating your big contract. You care more about doing the right thing than looking good. That's strength. Lewis felt better. Michael had a way of making hard things seem possible. Will you do something? For me? Lewis asked. Anything. Lewis stood up and walked close to Michael. He looked around to make sure they were alone. Then he leaned close to Michael's ear and whispered something very quietly. Michael's eyes grew wide. Then they filled with tears. He grabbed Lewis's hands. Lewis, are you sure? Lewis nodded. I'm sure. Promise me, Michael. Promise you'll remember. Michael wiped his eyes. His voice was thick with emotion. I promise you, Lewis, I will remember. Always. They hugged like brothers. 2 champions, 2 friends, 2 men who understood that racing was about more than just winning. As Lewis walked toward the door, Michael called out to him, Lewis! Yes? Mercedes will be lucky to have you. And in a few years, when you're winning championships with them, Remember this night. Remember that you were brave enough to follow your heart." Lewis smiled and waved goodbye. He walked out into the cold December night, feeling stronger than he had in months. Behind him, Michael stood alone in the garage, thinking about Lewis's whispered words. They were words that would change everything. Words that would matter more than either man could imagine. But that's a story for another day. As Lewis drove away from Ferrari, he had no idea that in just 2 weeks, everything would change. He had no idea that Michael Schumacher would need him more than he could ever need Michael. He had no idea that the promise Michael just made would become the most important promise of both their lives. December 29th, 2012. The snow fell softly on the mountains of Méribel, France. It was a perfect day for skiing. The sun was bright. The air was crisp and clean. Families laughed as they glided down the white slopes. Michael Schumacher felt happy and free. He loved skiing almost as much as racing. The speed, the control, the feeling of flying down a mountain. Today was special because his 13-year-old son, Mick, was with him. "Dad, watch this," Mick called out. He turned his skis and sprayed snow everywhere. Michael laughed. "Very good, but keep your knees bent and don't go too fast." "You always go fast," Mick said with a grin. "That's different. I'm old and foolish. You're young and smart." They skied together down the mountain, father and son. Both had the same green eyes. Both loved speed. Both were careful and skilled on the slopes. At 11:00 in the morning, they stopped for hot chocolate at a small cafe. Other skiers recognized Michael and asked for photos. He was always kind to fans. He signed napkins and talked about racing. "Are you coming back to Formula One?" a young boy asked. Michael smiled. "No, I'm done with racing. Now I just want to spend time with my family." After their break, they decided to ski one more run before lunch. It was an easy slope, one they had skied many times before. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that should have gone wrong. "Race you to the bottom," Mick called. "Out." "You're on," Michael replied. They pushed off together, father and son racing down the mountain, just like they had done 100 times before. The snow was perfect. Their skis cut clean lines in the white powder. But then, something happened. Something that would change everything forever. Michael saw a rock sticking out of the snow. He turned, quickly to avoid it. Too quickly. His skis crossed. He lost his balance. Time seemed to slow down. Michael felt himself falling. He tried to catch himself, but it was too late. His head hit a rock hidden under the snow. Hard. Very hard. "Dad!" Mick screamed. Michael lay still in the snow. Blood colored the white ground around his head. His eyes were closed. He wasn't moving. Mick skied down as fast as he could. "Dad! Dad, wake up!" He fell to his knees beside his father. "Please wake up." Other skiers stopped to help. Someone called for the mountain rescue team. Someone else called for a helicopter. But Michael didn't wake up. "Stay with us, sir," a rescue worker said as they put Michael on a stretcher. "You're going to be okay." But Michael couldn't hear them. He was already far away, lost in a deep sleep that might never end. At their home in Switzerland, Corinna Schumacher was making lunch. She hummed a Christmas song as she worked in the kitchen. She was happy. Her family was together for the holidays. Life was good. The phone rang at 11:47 a.m. "Hello? Mrs. Schumacher? This is the Méribel Rescue Service. There's been an accident." The wooden spoon fell from Corinna's hand. It clattered on the kitchen floor. What kind of accident? Your husband fell while skiing. He hit his head. We're taking him to Grenoble Hospital by helicopter. Corinna's legs felt weak. She sat down hard on a kitchen chair. How bad is it? There was a pause. Ma'am, you should come right away. Corinna's hand shook as she called her daughter Gina. Then their friends. Then Michael's manager. Everyone needed to know. The greatest racing driver in the world was fighting for his life. 3,000 miles away, Lewis Hamilton was lying on a beach in Barbados. He was finally relaxing after his stressful year. The warm sun felt good on his skin. He was reading a book and drinking coconut water. His phone buzzed. A text message from his friend Nico Rosberg. Have you heard about Michael? Skiing accident. Very bad. Prayers needed. Lewis sat up so fast he knocked over his drink. He called. Nico, immediately. What happened? Head injury. He's in a coma. They don't know if he'll make it. Lewis felt sick. Just 2 weeks ago, he was talking with Michael in that garage. Michael was so alive, so strong, so wise. I'm coming home, Lewis said. Lewis, there's nothing you can do. I'm coming home. Lewis packed his bags and caught the next flight to Europe. During the long flight, he thought about their last conversation, about the promise Michael had made, about the whispered words that now seemed so important. What if Michael never woke up? What if he never remembered their secret? What if Lewis never got to see his friend again? Grenoble Hospital looked like a fortress. Gray walls, small windows, serious doctors walking quickly through white hallways. This was where they brought people who were fighting death. Michael lay in the intensive care unit. Machines beeped around his bed. Tubes helped him breathe. His head was wrapped in white bandages. He looked small and fragile. Corinna sat beside his bed holding his hand. She hadn't left his side for 2 days. Mick and Gina stayed close to their mother. The whole family was scared and tired. Any change? Lewis asked quietly. He had just arrived from the airport. Corinna looked up with red eyes. No change. The doctors say his brain is swelling. They don't know if he'll ever wake up. Lewis pulled up a chair beside Michael's bed. His friend looked so different, so still. The strong hands that once gripped steering wheels at 200 miles per hour now lay lifeless on white sheets. I'm here, Michael, Lewis whispered. I'm here, and I remember everything. But Michael couldn't hear him. The machines kept beeping. The tubes kept breathing for him. And Lewis wondered if his friend would ever open his eyes again. Dr. Payan, the head doctor, came to talk to the family. The next few days are critical, he said in careful English. Michael's brain needs time to heal. We're doing everything we can, but we must be patient. Will he be okay? Mick asked. His young voice was full of fear. The doctor looked at the 13-year-old boy with kind eyes. Your father is very strong. He's fought many battles in his life. Now he's fighting the biggest battle of all. That night, Lewis stayed at the hospital. He couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Michael's words in the Ferrari garage. Family, friends, the people who love you when you're slow and old and forgotten. That's what matters. Now Michael was the one who needed family and friends. Lewis was going to be there for him, no matter how long it took. He pulled out his phone and canceled all his holiday plans. Mercedes would have to wait. Racing would have to wait. His friend needed him now. I promise you, Michael, Lewis whispered in the dark hospital room. I'll remember everything, and I'll make sure your promise comes true, even if you can't remember making it. Outside, Snow continued to fall on the French mountains. Inside, a champion slept a sleep that might never end. And his friend sat guard, holding on to hope and a secret that only they shared. January 2013 came and went like a sad, gray dream. Michael Schumacher remained in his deep sleep at Grenoble Hospital. The doctors called it a coma. The family called it waiting. The world called it a miracle that he was still alive. Lewis Hamilton started his new job at Mercedes, but his heart wasn't in it. Every morning, he woke up thinking about Michael. Every night, he went to sleep wondering if his friend would ever open his eyes again. The first Mercedes test was in February at the Circuit de Catalunya in Spain. Lewis sat in his new silver car and tried to focus, but all he could think about was Michael lying in that hospital bed. "How does the car feel?" asked Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team boss. "It feels different," Lewis said. What he didn't say was that everything felt different now. Racing without Michael in the world felt wrong, like something important was missing. Lewis finished the test day and immediately flew to France. He had been visiting Michael twice a week since the accident. Sometimes he brought flowers. Sometimes he brought music. Always, he brought hope. "Any change today?" Lewis asked Corinna. She shook her head. Dark circles had formed under her eyes. She looked 10 years older than she had 2 months ago. "The doctors say his brain is healing slowly, but slowly might not be fast enough." Lewis sat down beside Michael's bed. His friend looked exactly the same as he had yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. The machines still breathed for him. The tubes still fed him. But somewhere inside, Lewis believed Michael was still fighting. "I started with Mercedes," Lewis told the sleeping man. "The car is okay, but not great. You were right about being patient. It's going to take time to win with them." Lewis talked to Michael about everything, about racing, about the weather, about silly things that happened in the paddock. He wasn't sure if Michael could hear him, but it felt good to talk to his friend. March brought the first race of the 2013 season in Australia. Lewis finished 5th. Not bad, but not great either. After the race, reporters asked him about Michael. "He's fighting," Lewis said simply. "That's all I can tell you." What Lewis couldn't tell them was how much he missed his friend's advice, how much he needed someone to talk to about the pressure of changing teams, how much he worried that Michael might never wake up. After Australia came Malaysia, then China, then Bahrain. Lewis won 0 races in the first part of the season. Mercedes was fast, but not reliable. The car broke down a lot. Lewis felt frustrated, but he remembered Michael's words about patience. In May, Lewis had a chance to visit Michael on his way to the Monaco Grand Prix. Monaco was special because Michael had won there 5 times. Lewis thought maybe being there would help somehow. "Monaco is this weekend," Lewis told Michael. "Remember when you won there in 1994? You told me it was your favorite victory because it was raining and you had to drive by feel, not by thinking." For just a moment, Lewis thought he saw Michael's eyelids flutter, like he was trying to wake up. But then the moment passed, and Michael was still again. Dr. Payen found Lewis in the hallway after the visit. "His brain activity is getting stronger," the doctor said. "We're seeing more movement in his scans. It's a good sign." "Does that mean he'll wake up?" "It means he's not giving up. Your friend is a fighter." Lewis flew to Monaco feeling more hopeful than he had in months. He finished 4th in the race and dedicated it to Michael on the radio. "That was for my friend who's fighting the biggest race of his life," Lewis said. Summer 2013 was hard for everyone. Lewis won his first race with Mercedes in Hungary, but the victory felt empty without Michael there to share it. In the past, Michael would have called or sent a message. Now, there was only silence. Lewis started spending more time with Mick Schumacher. The 14-year-old was racing go-karts and showing real talent. But he was also sad and confused about his father. "Do you think he'll ever wake up?" Mick asked during one of Lewis's visits to Switzerland. Lewis and Mick were sitting by Lake Geneva, throwing stones into the water. It was a beautiful summer day, but both of them felt heavy with worry. "Chatif, think your dad is the strongest person I know," Lewis said carefully. "If anyone can come back from this, it's him. But what if he doesn't? What if he stays asleep forever?" Lewis put his arm around Mick's shoulders. The boy looked so much like his father at that age. Same eyes, same determination, same questions about life. "Then we'll make sure he knows we never forgot him. We'll make sure his legacy lives on through you and your sister. We'll make sure the world remembers how great he was." "Will you teach me to drive?" Mick asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" "Real cars, not just go-karts. Dad was going to teach me when I turned 15. But now—" Mick's voice trailed off. Lewis understood. The boy needed someone to fill the empty space his father had left behind. "I'll teach you everything I know," Lewis promised. "But first, you have to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll drive for yourself, not for your father's memory. Your dad always said the most important thing is to be yourself." Mick nodded seriously. "I promise." They threw more stones into the lake. Each splash was like a wish sent into the universe. Please let Michael wake up. Please let him see his son grow up. Please let him remember the promise he made. By autumn 2013, Michael had been moved to a private room. The doctors said his condition was stable, but unchanged. He was breathing on his own now, which was good news, but he still hadn't opened his eyes. Lewis visited before the Japanese Grand Prix in October. Japan was always Michael's favorite race because the fans there loved racing more than celebrity. They cared about skill and respect. "The Japanese fans still ask about you," Lewis told Michael. "They hold up signs with your name at every race. They haven't forgotten." Lewis pulled out his phone and showed pictures to Michael's closed eyes. Pictures of fans wearing red Ferrari shirts with Michael's number. Pictures of children holding toy cars painted like Michael's old racers. "You changed so many lives," Lewis continued. "Kids who started racing because they watched you. Drivers who learned from your example. Me included." Lewis stayed late that night. The hospital was quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines. He held Michael's hand and talked about their conversation in Maranello. "I keep thinking about what you said, about family being the most important thing. I'm trying to be family for Mick and Corinna, but it's hard without you here to guide me." For the first time since the accident, Lewis started to cry. Not because he felt sorry for himself, but because he missed his friend so much. He missed Michael's wisdom, his laugh, his way of making everything seem possible. "I need you to wake up," Lewis whispered. "I need you to keep your promise. There are things only you can do, things only you can say." But Michael slept on, lost in dreams that no one else could share. December 2013 marked one full year since the accident. Lewis had won no championships with Mercedes yet, but he had learned patience. He had learned that some victories take longer than others. On the anniversary of Michael's accident, Lewis visited Switzerland. The Schumacher family was having a quiet day at home. No cameras, No reporters, just family and friends remembering better times. He would be proud of you, Corinna told Lewis. The way you've stayed close to us. The way you've helped with Mick. He always said you were special. Lewis looked at a photo on the mantel. It showed Michael holding the championship trophy from 2004. His smile was huge. His eyes were bright with joy. He looked unstoppable. I made him a promise that night at Ferrari. Lewis said quietly, I intend to keep it, no matter how long it takes. What kind of promise? Lewis smiled sadly. The kind that only makes sense when you're both awake to remember it. As 2013 ended and 2014 began, Lewis held on to hope like a lifeline. Michael was still alive, still fighting, still somewhere inside that sleeping body, waiting for the right moment to come home. Lewis didn't know it yet, but 2014 would bring changes. Good changes. Changes that would make Michael's promise more important than ever. But for now, all Lewis could do was wait and believe that champions never give up, even when the race seems impossible to win. March 2014. The Formula One season was about to start, and Lewis Hamilton felt different. Not just because Mercedes had built a faster car, not just because he was more comfortable with his new team. He felt different because of what happened 3 weeks ago. It was a cold February morning in Switzerland. Lewis had driven to the Schumacher family home in Glan to visit Michael, who had been moved there for private care 6 months earlier. The house was quiet and peaceful, overlooking Lake Geneva. Lewis brought his 2 dogs, Coco and Roscoe. They were small English bulldogs who loved everyone they met. Lewis thought maybe familiar sounds might help Michael somehow. The doctors say hearing is often the last sense to go and the first to come back, Corinna explained as they walked into Michael's room. Michael looked better at home than he had in the hospital. The room was bright and warm. Photos of his racing career covered the walls. His championship trophies sat on shelves nearby. It felt like Michael, even though he still lay motionless in his bed. Hello, Michael, Lewis said softly. I brought some friends to see you. Coco jumped onto the bed and sniffed Michael's hand. Roscoe barked once, then settled down beside the bed. For the next hour, Lewis talked to Michael about the upcoming season. Mercedes thinks we have a real chance this year. The car feels amazing in testing, fast and reliable. You always said that combination wins championships. Lewis paused and watched Michael's face carefully. For just a moment, he thought he saw something. A tiny movement around Michael's eyes, like he was trying to focus on something. Michael? Lewis leaned closer. Can you hear me? But Michael's face was still again. Lewis sat back, disappointed. Maybe he had imagined it. Then Coco licked Michael's hand, and Michael's fingers moved, just a little. Just for a second. But they definitely moved. Lewis's heart started beating faster. Corinna, come here quickly. Corinna rushed into the room. What happened? His hand moved when Coco licked him. I swear it moved. They watched carefully, but Michael's hand stayed still. After a few minutes, Corinna shook her head. Sometimes we see what we want to see, she said gently. But Lewis knew what he had seen. Michael was still in there, somewhere deep inside. He was fighting to come back. The 2014 Formula One season started in Australia, and Lewis knew immediately that this year would be special. His Mercedes car was the fastest on the track. He won the race easily, his first victory in Australia. Standing on the podium, listening to the British national anthem, Lewis thought about Michael. He wished his friend could see this moment. He wished Michael could know that Mercedes was finally winning again. After the celebration, Louis called Corinna from his hotel room. "How's he doing today?" "The same. But Louis, I wanted to tell you something. Yesterday, when the nurse was moving him, I thought I heard him make a sound. Not a word, but like he was trying to say something." Louis felt that familiar flutter of hope in his chest. "What kind of sound?" "I'm not sure. Maybe I imagined it, but it seemed like he was responding to her voice." Louis won 3 of the first 4 races. The Mercedes car was dominant, and he was driving better than ever. But with each victory, he felt more sad that Michael wasn't there to share the excitement. In May, Louis visited Michael before the Monaco Grand Prix. Monaco always made him think of their conversation at Ferrari. Michael had talked about his struggles there before finally winning. "I'm leading the championship," Louis told his sleeping friend. "Can you believe it? Me, leading after only 2 years with Mercedes. You were right about being patient." Louis pulled out his phone and played some music. Classical pieces that Michael used to listen to before races. As the soft piano melody filled the room, Louis watched Michael's face. "Do you remember this song? You told me once that music helps you think clearly, that it calms your mind before big races." Suddenly, Michael's eyelids fluttered. Not once, but several times. Like he was trying to open his eyes, but couldn't quite manage it. Louis held his breath. "Michael? Michael, can you hear the music?" The fluttering stopped, but Louis was sure he had seen it. Michael was responding to sounds, to voices, to music. He was coming back, one tiny step at a time. Louis won the Monaco Grand Prix the next day, his 4th victory of the season. As he crossed the finish line, he shouted into his radio, "That was for Michael. That was for my friend who's fighting to come home." The whole world heard those words. Reporters asked Louis about Michael after the race. "He's getting stronger," Louis said carefully. "The family asks for privacy, but I can tell you that Michael Schumacher is a fighter. He's not giving up." 2 weeks later, Louis got the phone. Call he had been waiting for. "Louis," Corinna's voice was excited. "You need to come to Switzerland. Now." "What happened? Is he okay?" "Just come. Please." Louis caught the next flight from London. During the 2-hour trip, his mind raced with possibilities. Was Michael awake? Was he talking? Was he? Louis didn't want to think about the other possibility. When he arrived at the Schumacher home, Corinna met him at the door. Her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. "Come with me," she said. They walked quietly to Michael's room. Louis expected to see the same scene as always. Michael lying still in his bed, eyes closed, silent. But this time was different. Michael's eyes were open, not fully alert, not focused, but open. He was looking around the room slowly, like he was trying to remember where he was. "Michael?" Louis whispered. Michael's eyes moved toward the sound of Louis's voice. For just a moment, their eyes met. Michael didn't speak, but Louis saw something there. Recognition? Understanding? It was hard to tell. "He's been like this for 2 hours, Corinna explained quietly. "The doctors say it's a very good sign. His brain is starting to wake up." Louis sat down beside the bed. Michael's eyes followed his movement. "Hello, my friend," Louis said softly. "Welcome back." Michael's mouth moved slightly, like he was trying to speak. But no words came out. His eyes looked confused and tired. "Don't try to talk yet," Louis continued. "Just rest. Just know that we're all here. We've been waiting for you." Louis stayed for 3 hours. Sometimes Michael's eyes were open. Sometimes they closed. But Lewis could tell that his friend was truly there now. Not fully awake, but not completely lost either. Before leaving, Lewis leaned close to Michael's ear. "Do you remember our conversation at Ferrari? Do you remember the promise you made?" Michael's eyes moved to look at Lewis. For just a second, Lewis thought he saw a tiny nod. So small that maybe he imagined it. But maybe he didn't. July 2014. Lewis was having the best season of his career. He had won 6 races and was leading the championship by 30 points. Mercedes was dominating Formula One, just like Ferrari had done in Michael's best years. But the most important victory wasn't happening on racetracks. It was happening in a quiet house by Lake Geneva. Michael was improving every week. He could stay awake for longer periods. He could follow people with his eyes. Sometimes he tried to speak, though the words weren't clear yet. Lewis visited after winning the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. It was his home race, and the crowd had cheered louder than ever when he crossed the finish line. "The British fans were incredible today," Lewis told Michael. "They sang the national anthem so loud I could hear it over my engine. I thought about you during the race, about how you always said that home races are special because you're racing for everyone you love." Michael was sitting up in a wheelchair now. His eyes were more alert than Lewis had seen them since the accident. When Lewis spoke, Michael clearly turned his head to listen. "You look stronger," Lewis said. Michael's mouth moved. He was trying to say something. Lewis leaned closer. Lou!" The sound was barely a whisper, but it was definitely a word. Lewis felt tears in his eyes. "Yes, it's Lewis. I'm here, Michael." Michael tried again. "Lou. Is. That's right. Lewis, you remember my name." Michael's eyes filled with tears, too. He lifted his hand slowly and reached toward Lewis. Lewis took his friend's hand and squeezed it gently. "I've missed you so much," Lewis said. Michael squeezed back. Weak, but real. He was coming home. That night, Lewis walked around Lake Geneva, thinking about promises and friendship and the strange ways life tests people. Michael was getting better. Not quickly, and maybe not completely, but better. And somewhere in Michael's healing mind, Lewis hoped his friend still remembered their secret conversation. Because soon, that promise would matter more than either of them could have imagined. The championship fight was heating up. Mick Schumacher was getting faster in go-karts, and Michael Schumacher was learning to speak again. One word at a time. Everything was about to change. November 2014. Lewis Hamilton was one race away from winning his second world championship. The final race was in Abu Dhabi, and he felt nervous and excited at the same time. But first, he had something important to do. Lewis flew to Switzerland the day before leaving for Abu Dhabi. He wanted to see Michael before the biggest race of his year. He needed his friend's blessing, even if Michael couldn't give it in words. When Lewis arrived at the Schumacher home, he found Michael sitting in his wheelchair by the big window overlooking the lake. Michael's physical therapist was working. With him on, moving his arms, his progress was slow but steady. "Michael," Lewis said as he walked into the room. Michael turned his head and smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Lewis," he said clearly. It was the first time he had said Lewis's name without struggling. "You said my name perfectly." Lewis was so happy he almost cried. "Practice," Michael said with effort. "Every day." They sat together watching the lake. Michael could speak in short sentences now, though he still got tired quickly. His memory was better, too. He remembered people and places from before the accident. "Big race tomorrow?" Michael asked. "Yes." the championship race. If I finish in the top two, I win the title. Michael nodded slowly. You will win. How do you know? Michael smiled again. Champions always find a way. Lewis felt a warm feeling in his chest. This was the Michael he remembered. Wise and confident, still fighting to come back to the world. Can I tell you something? Lewis asked. Always. I'm scared. Not about the race. About other things. About keeping promises I made. About being the right person at the right time. Michael looked confused. What promises? Lewis's heart sank a little. Michael's memory was better, but not perfect. He had forgotten their conversation at Ferrari. He had forgotten the secret Lewis told him. He had forgotten the promise he made. It's okay, Lewis said quickly. Nothing important, just racing stuff. But inside, Lewis felt worried. What if Michael never remembered? What if the promise was lost forever? Lewis won the championship in Abu Dhabi. It was a perfect race. He drove smoothly and smartly, finishing second behind his teammate Nico Rosberg. When he crossed the finish line, he was the world champion for the second time. Standing on the podium with his gold medal, Lewis looked up at the sky and thought about Michael. He wished his friend could have seen the race. He wished Michael could remember why this victory was so special. After the celebration, Lewis called Switzerland. Congratulations, Corinna said. She sounded so happy. Michael watched the whole race on television. He clapped when you won. He said, Lewis champion, very clearly. Lewis felt proud and sad at the same time. Michael was getting better, but he was still not the same person who had made that promise 2 years ago. Christmas. 2014 was quiet for the Schumacher family. They stayed home and enjoyed being together. Michael was strong enough to sit at the dinner table for the whole meal. He could feed himself and have simple conversations. Lewis visited on December 27th, 2 days before the anniversary of the accident. He brought presents for everyone, including a special gift for Michael. This is for you, Lewis said, handing Michael a small wrapped box. Michael opened it carefully. Inside was a photo from their night at Ferrari in 2012. Someone had taken a picture of them standing next to the red F2004 car. Both men were smiling and talking. It was taken just before their private conversation. Michael stared at the photo for a long time. His face looked confused and thoughtful. I remember this car, he said slowly. Yes, your championship car from 2004. We talked about it that night. We talked about what? Lewis hesitated. Should he tell Michael about their conversation? About the secret Lewis had shared? About the promise Michael had made? We talked about racing. About taking risks. About following your heart. Michael nodded, but Lewis could see he was struggling to remember more. There was something else, Michael said quietly. Something important. But I can't. It's okay. Don't force it. Your memory will come back when it's ready. But Lewis hoped it would come back soon, because Mick was getting older and faster. Soon he would need the guidance that only his father could give. 2015 brought new challenges and new hope. Lewis started winning races again with Mercedes. Michael continued improving at home. And Mick Schumacher, now 15 years old, was starting to race real cars. In March, Lewis got a phone call that changed everything. Lewis, Mick's voice was excited on the phone. I won! I won my first car race! Mick had been competing in a junior racing series in Germany. His first victory was at the Hockenheimring, the track near his father's hometown. It was a perfect place for a Schumacher to win his first race. "That's amazing," Lewis said. "How do you feel? Scared and happy and proud all at the same time? I wish Dad could have been there." "He was there, Mick. In your heart and in your talent. You drive like him. Will you come visit soon? I want to tell Dad about the race myself." Lewis arrived in Switzerland the next day. He found the whole family celebrating Mick's victory. Michael was sitting in his favorite chair, looking more alert than Lewis had seen him in months. "Mick won," Michael said when he saw Lewis. His words were clear and proud. "Yes, he did. At Hockenheim. Your old track." Michael's eyes grew wide. "Hockenheim? The same place you won so many races. Like father, like son." Suddenly, Michael grabbed Lewis's arm. His grip was stronger than it had been since the accident. "The promise," Michael said urgently. "I remember. The promise." Lewis felt his heart start beating faster. "What do you remember? You told me about your father, about Anthony, about the real father who died." Lewis nodded slowly. Michael was remembering their conversation from Ferrari. "And I promised, if something happened to you, I would tell Mick about racing, about being brave." "Yes," Lewis whispered. "That's exactly what you promised." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "But nothing happened to you. You're here. You're winning. You're—" "I'm here," Lewis said softly. "But Mick still needs to hear those words. Not from me. From you. From his father." Michael looked across the room at Mick, who was showing his trophy to his mother and sister. The boy looked so much like Michael at that age. Same determination. Same hunger to be fast. "What do I tell him?" Michael asked. "Tell him the truth. That racing is dangerous but beautiful. That being fast is less important than being smart. That he can choose his own path, not just follow yours." Michael nodded slowly. "Will you help me find the words?" "Always." That evening, Michael asked Mick to sit with him on the terrace overlooking the lake. Lewis watched from inside the house as father and son talked quietly together. He couldn't hear their words, but he could see Mick listening carefully to everything his father said. When they came back inside, both Michael and Mick were crying happy tears. "What did you talk about?" Corinna asked. "Racing," Mick said simply, "and choosing my own dreams." Michael looked at Lewis and nodded. The promise was being kept, one conversation at a time. Later that night, as Lewis prepared to leave, Michael pulled him aside. "Thank you," Michael said. "For what?" "For remembering, for waiting, for helping me keep my word." Lewis hugged his friend. "That's what friends do. We keep each other's promises." As Lewis drove back to the airport, he felt lighter than he had in years. Michael was coming back. Not completely, and maybe never fully, but enough to be the father Mick needed. Enough to remember what mattered most. The secret conversation from Ferrari was no longer a secret. The promise was being kept, and everything was about to change again, in ways that would surprise them all. May 2017, Lewis Hamilton was having another great season with Mercedes. He had won 3 races already and was leading the championship. But today, racing was the last thing on his mind. He was sitting in a doctor's office in Geneva, listening to news that seemed impossible to believe. "Michael's progress has been remarkable," Dr. Elizabeth Weber said. She was Michael's new doctor, a specialist in brain injuries. "His speech is almost normal now. His memory is about 80% recovered. His walking is improving every week." Lewis could hardly believe what he was hearing. 4.5 years after the accident, Michael was getting his life back. Can he Does he remember everything now? Lewis asked. Most things, yes. Recent events are still fuzzy sometimes, but his long-term memory is very strong. He remembers his racing career clearly. He remembers his family. He remembers his friends. Dr. Webber smiled. He talks about you often, Mr. Hamilton. He says you visited him every month, even when he couldn't respond. That meant everything to his recovery. Lewis felt tears in his eyes. When can I see him? He's waiting for you right now. Michael looked. Amazing. He was sitting in a chair by himself, reading a newspaper. His hair had grown back thick and gray. His eyes were bright and focused. When he saw Lewis walk in, he stood up and walked over to give him a hug. A real hug. Strong and warm and completely normal. My friend, Michael said in perfect, clear English. Thank you for never giving up on me. Lewis hugged him back so hard he thought he might cry. I can't believe it. You're really back. Not completely. I still get tired easily. Sometimes I forget small things, but yes, I'm back. They sat down together like old times. Michael moved carefully, but normally. He spoke without struggling for words. It was like a miracle. Tell me about racing, Michael said. Are you still fast? Lewis laughed. Still fast, still trying to catch. Up to your 7 championships. You will. You're better than I was at your age. They talked for 2 hours about everything. About racing. About family. About the long, dark years when Michael was sleeping and Lewis was waiting. I remember our conversation at Ferrari. Michael said suddenly. All of it. Your secret about Anthony. Your real father. The promise I made. You kept that promise. You talked to Mick about racing and choosing his own path. Michael smiled. That was just the beginning. There's more to do. What do you mean? Michael looked serious. Mick is 17 now. He's winning races in Formula 4. Soon he'll move to Formula 3, then Formula 2. Eventually, maybe Formula 1. That's wonderful. But he's struggling with pressure. Everyone expects him to be exactly like me. To win 7 championships. To be perfect. He's scared he'll disappoint people. Lewis understood. Being the son of a legend was harder than being a legend yourself. What can we do? We need to show him that he's already enough. That his value doesn't come from winning races. That he can honor my legacy by being himself, not by copying me. Lewis nodded. How do we do that? Michael smiled mysteriously. I have an idea. But first, I need to ask you something important. Anything. That night at Ferrari, you told me about your real father. About how Anthony chose to raise you even though he didn't have to. Have you ever told Anthony how much that meant to you? Lewis felt uncomfortable. We don't really talk about emotional things. You know how British men are. Lewis, that man gave you everything. His time, his money, his love. He deserves to know that you understand his sacrifice. Lewis knew Michael was right. Anthony Hamilton had worked 3 jobs to pay for Lewis's racing. He had never married because he was too busy being a father. He had given up his own dreams, so Lewis could chase his dreams. I'll talk to him, Lewis promised. Good. Because family is everything. Both the family you're born into and the family you choose. June 2017. Lewis won the Monaco Grand Prix for the 2nd time in his career. After the victory celebration, he flew straight to England to see his father. Anthony Hamilton lived in a small house in Hertfordshire. He was 62 years old now, with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 40 years working hard jobs to support his family. Congratulations on Monaco, Anthony said as they sat in his living room. Your mother would have been so proud. Louis looked at his father carefully. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you do it? Why did you take care of me when you didn't have to? Anthony looked surprised. What do you mean? I know about my real father. I know he died in a racing accident when I was a baby. I know you were his friend, not my biological father. Anthony's face went pale. He had kept this secret for 32 years. Who told you? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you chose to be my father. You chose to sacrifice everything for me. Why? Anthony was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and full of emotion. Your father, David Morrison, was my best friend. When he died at Brands Hatch, I held you at his funeral. You were just 6 months old. Your mother was devastated. She couldn't take care of you alone. Anthony wiped his eyes. David made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure you had a good life. But when I started taking care of you, it stopped being about keeping a promise. It became about love. Louis felt his heart breaking and healing at the same time. You became my son the first time you called me Daddy. You became my pride the first time you won a go-kart race. You became my everything the day I realized I would rather be your father than anything else in the world. Louis hugged Anthony and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. I love you, Dad. Not because you had to take care of me, but because you chose to. You're the best father anyone could ask for. I love you too, son. I always have. I always will. August 2017. Louis arranged something special. He invited both Anthony and Michael to the Hungarian Grand Prix. It would be Michael's first public appearance since his accident. The Formula One world went crazy when they saw Michael Schumacher walking into the Mercedes garage. Reporters surrounded him. Fans screamed his name. Everyone wanted to know how he was feeling. I feel grateful, Michael said simply. Grateful to be alive. Grateful to be here. Grateful for friends who never gave up on me. Louis won the race that day, his 6th victory of the season. But the best moment came after the race, when Louis brought Anthony and Michael together. Dad, Louis said to Anthony, I want you to meet my friend Michael. Michael, this is my father, Anthony. The two older men shook hands. They were so different. Anthony was quiet and humble. Michael was famous and confident. But they had one thing in common. They both loved Louis like their own son. Thank you, Michael said to Anthony, for raising such a good man. Thank you, Anthony replied, for being such a good friend to him. Later that evening, the three of them sat together in Louis's hotel room. Louis felt complete in a way he had never felt before. His chosen father and his chosen brother, both there to support him. I have something to tell you both, Louis said. Something I've never told anyone. Michael and Anthony looked at him with curious eyes. That night at Ferrari, when I told Michael about my real father, I didn't tell him everything. I didn't tell him why I was really scared about changing teams. What were you scared of? Michael asked. Louis took a deep breath. I was scared that if I failed, if I never won another championship, Dad would think he wasted his life on me. I was scared that all his sacrifices would be for nothing. Anthony looked shocked. Louis, you could never disappoint me. You're my son. My pride has nothing to do with how many races you win. I know that now, but back then I felt like I had to be perfect to deserve your love. Michael nodded sadly. I understand. That's exactly how Mick feels about me. like he has to be perfect to honor my memory. So what do we do? Lewis asked. Michael smiled. We show him what real love looks like. Unconditional love. The kind of love that doesn't depend on winning or losing. Anthony put his hand on Lewis's shoulder. The kind of love that lasts forever, no matter what. That night, Lewis called Mick Schumacher. The 18-year-old was racing in Formula 3 now, winning races and making people notice his talent. Mick, I want to tell you something your father told me once. Being fast is nothing compared to being human. You don't have to be the next Michael Schumacher. You just have to be the first Mick Schumacher. Mick was quiet on the phone. Do you really think that's enough? I know it is, because I learned something important today. The people who love us don't love us because we're champions. They love us because we're us. Thank you, Lewis. I needed to hear that. As Lewis hung up the phone, he looked at Michael and Anthony. 3 generations of men who had learned the most important lesson of all. That family isn't about blood or fame or success. It's about choosing to love someone and never giving up on them. The promise was being kept in ways that none of them had expected. And there was still more to come. December 2020. The world felt different because of COVID-19. People stayed home more. Families spent more time together. And for the Schumacher family, this extra time became a gift they never expected. Michael had been doing well for 3 years now. He walked without help. He drove a car around their neighborhood. He even went to some of Mick's races. The boy who had once been lost in sleep was now fully awake and living again. But today was the biggest day in years for the Schumacher family. Mick was about to sign his first Formula One contract. Lewis Hamilton sat in the living room of the Schumacher home, watching the excitement around him. Mick paced back and forth, nervous and excited. Corinna smiled as she prepared coffee for everyone. Gina, now 23, filmed everything with her phone. And Michael sat in his favorite chair, calm and proud, watching his son prepare for the moment he had dreamed about since he was a little boy. Are you ready for this? Lewis asked Mick. I think so. Yes. Mick laughed nervously. I've wanted this my whole life, but now that it's happening, I'm terrified. Michael stood up and walked over to his son. At 51, he moved a little slower than before his accident, but he was strong and steady. Mick, he said quietly, come sit with me. Father and son sat together on the couch. The room grew quiet. Everyone could feel this was an important moment. Do you remember what I told you when you won your first car race? Michael asked. You said I should be myself, not try to be you. That's right, and that's still true today. When you sign this contract, you're not signing as Michael Schumacher's son. You're signing as Mick Schumacher, your own person, your own driver. Mick nodded, but Lewis could see the fear still in his eyes. What if I'm not good enough? What if everyone expects me to win 7 championships like you? Michael smiled and looked at Lewis. Lewis, will you tell Mick about your first year with Mercedes? Lewis understood what Michael wanted him to say. I was terrible my first year with Mercedes. We won 0 races in 2013. People said I made a mistake leaving McLaren. They said I would never win again. But you kept trying, Michael added. I kept trying because someone told me that the best victories come after the hardest defeats. Lewis looked at Michael. Someone told me that patience and courage matter more than talent. And look at you now, Michael said. 6 championships. More wins than anyone except me. And you're still getting better. Mick seemed to relax a little. So it's okay if I'm not perfect right away? It's okay if you're never perfect, Michael said firmly. Perfect is boring. Real is better. At exactly 2:20 p.m., the officials from Haas Formula One team arrived. They brought contracts and cameras and excitement. Mick would be racing for Haas in 2021, partnered with Russian driver Nikita Mazepin. Lewis watched as Mick signed his name on the contract. The young man's hand shook slightly, but his signature was clear and strong. When he finished writing, everyone clapped. But the most special moment came when Mick looked at his father. Michael's eyes were full of tears, but he was smiling, the biggest smile Lewis had ever seen. "I'm so proud of you," Michael said. "Not because you made it to Formula One. I'm proud because of who you are, because of how hard you worked, because of how kind you are to everyone you meet." Mick hugged his father, and both men cried happy tears. "Thank you, Dad, for everything, for coming back to us, for being here today." "I wouldn't miss this for the world," Michael replied. That evening, after all the officials and cameras were gone, Lewis found himself alone with Michael in his study. The room was full of trophies and photos from Michael's racing career. 7 championship trophies sat on a special shelf, gleaming in the soft light. "This feels like the end of something," Lewis said. "What do you mean?" "Mick is in Formula One. Now. He's grown up. Your recovery is complete. The promise we talked about in Ferrari. It feels like it's been fulfilled." Michael walked over to his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a piece of paper that looked old and worn. Lewis recognized it immediately. It was the letter Lewis had written the night of their Ferrari conversation. The letter where Lewis wrote down everything they had talked about, including the promise Michael had made. "I asked Corinna to find this letter in your things," Michael said. "I wanted to read it again and make sure I remembered everything correctly." Lewis felt nervous. "And?" Michael smiled and handed him the letter. "Read the last paragraph." Out loud. Lewis took the letter and found the last paragraph. His own handwriting from 8 years ago looked young and uncertain. "If something happens to me," Lewis T.Y. read, "please make sure Mick knows he can become champion without being afraid. Tell him that racing chose us, not the other way around. But most importantly, tell him that the greatest victory is not winning races. The greatest victory is finding people who love you for who you are, not what you accomplish." Lewis looked up at Michael. "I don't remember writing that last part." "You did. And it's the most important part of the whole promise." Michael sat down across from Lewis. "For 8 years, I thought the promise was about helping Mick with racing, about giving him advice and encouragement. But tonight, watching him sign that contract, I realized the real promise was different. What was it really about? It was about showing him what love looks like. Real love. The kind that doesn't depend on success or failure. The kind that Anthony showed you. The kind that you showed me during my recovery." Lewis felt a warm feeling in his chest. "The kind that says, 'I love you, no matter what happens on the track.'" Exactly. And now Mick knows that. He knows that his value doesn't come from being a racing driver. It comes from being himself. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on Lake Geneva. Inside, 2 friends reflected on how far they had all come. "There's something else," Michael said suddenly. "What?" Michael pulled out another piece of paper. This one was new, written in Michael's careful handwriting. "I wrote this for you, to thank you for keeping my promise when I couldn't." Lewis took the paper and read, "Dear Lewis, 8 years ago, You told me a secret about your father. You trusted me with your fears and your hopes. You asked me to make a promise, and I said yes. But what you didn't know is that you were also making a promise to me. You promised to be my friend, no matter what happened. You promised to never give up on me, even when I couldn't give anything back. You kept that promise when you visited me in the hospital. You kept it when you helped my family during the darkest time. You kept it when you became a mentor to Mick. You kept it when you never stopped believing I would come back. The promise we made wasn't really about Mick. It was about us, about the family we chose to create, about the love we decided to share. Thank you for teaching me that being fast is nothing compared to being human. Your friend always, Michael. Lewis finished reading and looked up at Michael with tears in his eyes. Michael, don't say anything. Just know that the promise has been kept. By both of us. In ways we never imagined. Lewis folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. It would stay with him forever, just like their friendship. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, two champions sat together, understanding that the greatest victories in life have nothing to do with racing at all. Tomorrow, Mick would begin preparing for his Formula One career. Lewis would continue chasing his 7th championship. Michael would keep recovering and growing stronger. But tonight, they were just 3 people who had learned the most important lesson of all. That promises kept between friends can change the world, one heart at a time. March 2021. The Bahrain Grand Prix was Mick Schumacher's first Formula One race. Lewis Hamilton had arranged for the entire Schumacher family to have the best seats in the paddock. It was a dream come true for everyone. But as Lewis sat in his Mercedes preparing for the race, his mind drifted back to that cold December night in Maranello, 8.5 years ago. So much had happened since then. So much had changed. And yet, the secret he had whispered to Michael that night had never been fully told. Not even to Michael himself. Lewis had only revealed part of the truth about his father. There was more to the story. Something deeper and more painful that he had carried alone all these years. After the race, Lewis found himself walking through the Bahrain paddock with Michael. Mick had finished 16th in his first F1 race. Not a great result, but he had completed every lap without mistakes. For a first race, it was perfect. He drove smart today, Michael said proudly. No risks, no crashes, just steady, careful racing. Just like his father taught him, Lewis replied. They found a quiet spot away from the crowds and cameras. The desert air was warm and peaceful. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of teams packing up their equipment. Michael, Lewis, said suddenly, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago. Michael looked concerned. What is it? Lewis took a deep breath. That night at Ferrari, when I told you about my real father dying in a racing accident, I didn't tell you the whole truth. What do you mean? Lewis sat down on a concrete barrier and stared at the ground. I told you my biological father was named David Morrison. I told you he died at Brands Hatch when I was a baby. I told you Anthony chose to raise me. Yes, I remember. But I didn't tell you how he died. I didn't tell you why he was racing that day. I didn't tell you the real reason I was so scared about joining Mercedes. Michael sat down beside his friend. Lewis, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you kept your promise to me. You helped Mick understand that he didn't have to be perfect. Now I need to keep my promise to you. I need to tell you the complete truth. Lewis looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. David Morrison wasn't just racing for fun that day at Brands Hatch. He was trying to make it as a professional driver. Just like me. Just like you. Just like Mick. Michael listened quietly. He had a wife and a baby son. Me. But he also had a dream. He thought if he could win enough races, he could get sponsors. He could make money racing. He could provide for his family by doing what he loved. Lewis's voice started to shake, but he was driving an old car. Unsafe. The brakes failed coming into Paddock Hill Bend. He hit the barrier at full speed. He died instantly. Lewis, my mother blamed racing for taking her husband away. She couldn't look at me without thinking about him. She couldn't take care of a baby who reminded her of everything she had lost. Tears filled Lewis's eyes. That's when Anthony stepped in. He wasn't just David's friend. He was David's mechanic. He was working on the car the day it crashed. Michael's face went pale. Oh, Lewis. Anthony blamed himself for David's death. He thought if he had checked the brakes one more time, if he had been more careful, his best friend would still be alive. Lewis wiped his eyes with his sleeve. So he made a promise. He promised to raise David's son. He promised to give me the opportunities David never had. He promised to make sure I succeeded where David had failed. That's why you were so scared about changing teams, Michael said quietly. Yes, I was terrified that if I failed with Mercedes, if I never won another championship, Anthony would think he had wasted 30 years of his life. I was scared that all his sacrifice, all his guilt, all his love would be for nothing. Michael put his arm around Lewis's shoulders. But that's not true. I know that now. But that night at Ferrari, I was drowning in pressure. I felt like I was carrying the dreams of two fathers. The one who died chasing his racing dream, and the one who gave up everything to help me chase mine. They sat in silence for a few minutes. In the distance, they could see Mick talking with his mother and sister, still excited about his first F1 race. What did you whisper to me that night? Michael asked gently. Lewis closed his eyes and remembered that cold garage in Maranello. 2 men standing beside a red racing car, sharing secrets in the darkness. I whispered, if something happens to me on track, if I die racing like my real father did, please tell Anthony that I know what he sacrificed. Tell him that I understand he raised me out of love, not guilt. Tell him that he gave me the best life any son could ask for. Tell him that he's my real father, in every way that matters. Michael's eyes filled with tears, and I promised. You promised to remember those words. You promised that if the worst happened, Anthony would know how much I loved him and appreciated everything he did for me. But nothing happened to you. You're here. You're alive. You're winning championships. Lewis smiled through his tears. I know. But the promise was never really about me dying. It was about me learning to live without fear, learning to race for joy instead of obligation, learning to be grateful instead of guilty. And have you learned those things? Yes. Thanks to you. Thanks to Anthony. Thanks to watching Mick grow up without the burden I carried for so long. Michael stood up and pulled Lewis to his feet. Come with me. There's something we need to do. What? We need to call Anthony. Right now. Tonight. You need to tell him what you just told me. Lewis felt scared. I don't know if I can. You can. Because that's what friends do. We help each other keep the promises that matter most. They walked back toward the Mercedes, hospitality area. Lewis pulled out his phone with shaking hands. It was late in England, but he knew Anthony would be awake. He always stayed up to watch Lewis race. The phone rang 3 times before Anthony answered. "Lewis, congratulations on second place today. You drove brilliantly." "Thanks, Dad. But I didn't call about the race. I called because I need to tell you something important." "What is it, son?" Lewis looked at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. "Dad, I know about David Morrison. I know about the accident. I know why you decided to raise me." There was a long silence on the phone. "Who told you?" Anthony asked quietly. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that I want you to know something. You didn't raise me because you felt guilty about David's death. You raised me because you chose to love me. And that choice made you my real father." Anthony started crying on the phone. Lewis could hear it in his voice. "Lewis, Let me finish, Dad. You gave me everything. Your time, your money, your dreams, your life. You worked 3 jobs so I could race go-karts. You never married because you were too busy being my father. You taught me how to be a good man, not just a fast driver. You were never a burden, Lewis. You were a gift. I know that now. And I want you to know that every championship I've won, every race I've conquered, every moment of success I've had, it's all because of you. David Morrison gave me life, but Anthony Hamilton gave me a life worth living." Both men were crying now. Michael stood nearby, wiping tears from his own eyes. "I love you, Dad. Not because you had to take care of me, but because you chose to. You're the best father any son could ask for. I love you too, Lewis, more than you'll ever know." When Lewis hung up the phone, he felt lighter than he had felt in years. The secret was finally out. The truth was finally told. The promise was finally complete. "Thank you," Lewis said to Michael. "For what?" "For helping me keep the promise I made to myself that night at Ferrari. To never let fear control my life. To always tell the people I love how much they mean to me." Michael smiled. "That's what friends do. We help each other become the people we're meant to be." As they walked back toward their families, Lewis realized that the promise they had made 8 years ago had been kept in ways neither of them had imagined. It wasn't just about racing or fathers or sons. It was about learning to love without conditions, learning to live without fear, learning to be grateful for the people who choose to stand by us no matter what. The greatest victory wasn't winning championships. It was finding people who love you for who you are, not what you accomplish. And Lewis had found that love in the most unexpected places. In a man who chose to be his father, and in a friend who chose to remember when he couldn't remember himself. October 2021. Lewis Hamilton was having the fight of his life, not on the racing track, but in his heart. He was chasing his 8th World Championship, which would make him the greatest Formula One driver in history. But his rival Max Verstappen was just as fast and just as hungry. The season had been like a boxing match. Lewis would win a race, then Max would win the next one. Back and forth, punch after punch, neither driver giving up an inch. But today, Lewis wasn't thinking about championships. He was sitting in a hospital room in Switzerland, holding Michael Schumacher's hand. Michael had suffered a setback, not a major one, but enough to worry everyone who loved him. His doctors said it was normal for brain injury patients to have good days and bad days, even years after their accident. Today was a bad day. "I'm scared, Lewis," Michael said quietly. His voice was weak and confused. "I can't remember things clearly today." What if I'm going backward? What if I forget everything again? Lewis squeezed his friend's hand. You're not going backward, Michael. You're just having a tough day. We all have tough days. But what if I forget the promise? What if I forget our conversation at Ferrari? What if I forget everything that matters? Lewis smiled gently. Then I'll remember for both of us. That's what friends do. Michael looked at Lewis with tired eyes. Tell me the story again. Tell me about that night in Maranello. Help me remember. Lewis pulled his chair closer to Michael's. Bed. Outside, autumn leaves danced in the Swiss wind. Inside, one friend helped another find his way back to the light. It was December 15th, 2012, Lewis began. You met me at the Ferrari factory after midnight. I was scared about joining Mercedes. You showed me your championship car and told me that the best victories come after the hardest defeats. Michael nodded slowly. Yes, I remember the car, the F2004. Red and beautiful. Then we talked about what really matters in life. You said it wasn't winning, or money, or fame. You said it was family. The people who love you when you're slow and old and forgotten. And you told me about your father. I told you about both my fathers. David, who died chasing his dreams, and Anthony, who gave up his dreams to help me chase mine. Michael's eyes became clearer. And you whispered something to me. I asked you to make a promise. If something happened to me, you would tell Anthony that I knew how much he sacrificed. That I understood he raised me out of love, not guilt. That he was my real father in every way that mattered. Promise. Kept, Michael said, smiling weakly. Yes, the promise was kept. In ways we never expected. Lewis told Michael the whole story again. About the accident. About the long recovery. About Mick's journey to Formula One. About learning to love without conditions. About understanding that family is about choice, not blood. By the time Lewis finished talking, Michael looked stronger. His confusion was gone. His memory was clear again. Thank you, Michael said, for remembering when I couldn't, for keeping my promises when I wasn't able to. Thank you for teaching me what friendship really means. November 2021. Lewis was one race away from either winning or losing the championship. The pressure was enormous. Every newspaper, every TV show, every racing fan in the world was talking about the title fight between Lewis and Max. But Lewis felt calm. He had learned something important from Michael's setback. Some things matter more than winning. Some victories are bigger than championships. Before flying to the final race in Abu Dhabi, Lewis made a special trip. He went to England to see Anthony. Then he flew to Switzerland to see Michael. Finally, he went to Germany to see Mick, who was having his own struggles in his first F1 season. Mick had not scored any points in his first year. His Haas car was slow and unreliable. Some people said he wasn't good enough for Formula One. The pressure was getting to him. I feel like I'm letting everyone down, Mick told Lewis over dinner in Munich. People expect me to be like my father, but I'm not fast enough. I'm not good enough. Lewis looked at the young man across the table. Mick was only 22, but he carried the weight of a famous name and impossible expectations. Can I tell you something your father told me once? Of course. He said that being fast is nothing compared to being human. You don't have to be the next Michael Schumacher. You just have to be the first Mick Schumacher. But what if the first Mick Schumacher isn't good enough? Lewis smiled. Then you'll still be enough, because your value doesn't come from racing. It comes from who you are as a person. How do you stay confident when everyone expects you to be perfect? I remember why I started racing. Not for fame or money or to make other people happy. I started racing because I loved it, because it made me feel alive, because it was fun. Lewis leaned forward. Mick, do you still love racing? Mick thought for a moment. Yes. When I'm alone in the car, when the cameras aren't watching, when I can just drive. Yes, I still love it. Then, that's enough. Love is always enough. That night, Lewis called Michael and told him about the conversation with Mick. You said exactly the right thing, Michael said. Mick needs to know that our love for him doesn't depend on his lap times. I learned that from watching you and Anthony. Unconditional love is the greatest gift we can give someone. Speaking of gifts, Michael said mysteriously, I have something for you. Something special for after your race in Abu Dhabi. What is it? You'll see. Just promise me you'll come to Switzerland after the race, no matter what happens. Win or lose. Win or lose. Some things are more important than championships. December 12th, 2021. Lewis Hamilton lost the World Championship in the most dramatic way possible. The final race in Abu Dhabi came down to the last lap. Max Verstappen passed Lewis with 4 corners to go and won his first title. Lewis was devastated. He had been so close to making history, so close to his 8th championship, but in the final moments, it slipped away. The whole world watched Lewis climb out of his car, defeated but dignified. He congratulated Max. He thanked his team. He spoke to reporters with grace and class. But inside, his heart was broken. 2 days later, Lewis flew to Switzerland as he had promised Michael. He felt empty and lost. Racing had been his whole life for 30 years. Without championships to chase, who was he? Michael was waiting for him at the door of the family home. He looked stronger than he had in months. His eyes were bright and alert. Hello, my friend, Michael said, giving Lewis a long hug. Hello, Michael. I'm sorry I lost. I know you wanted me to win number 8. Michael smiled. Lewis, sit down. I need to tell you something important. They went into Michael's study. The 7 championship trophies gleamed on their shelf. Lewis looked at them with sadness and envy. Do you know what I learned during my years of sleeping? Michael asked. What? I learned that trophies don't love you back. Championships don't hug you when you're scared. Wins don't hold your hand when you're dying. Michael walked over to his desk and picked up a small wooden box. The people who stayed with me during my darkest time, who visited me when I couldn't speak, who never gave up on me, those people are worth more than all the trophies in the world. He handed the box to Lewis. Open it. Inside was a simple gold bracelet. Engraved on it were the words, Promise Kept. LH to MS 2012. Michael, this is beautiful. But why? Because you kept a promise that changed my life. You promised to remember our conversation when I couldn't. You promised to help my son when I wasn't able. You promised to never give up on me, no matter how long it took. Lewis felt tears in his eyes. You would have done the same for me. Maybe. But you actually did it. For 9 years, you kept every promise you made. That makes you a champion in the only way that really matters. Michael helped Lewis put on the bracelet. It fit perfectly. Wear this when you feel like you're not enough. When you think your value comes from winning races. When you forget that you're loved for who you are, not what you accomplish. Lewis looked at the bracelet, then at Michael's 7 trophies, then back at his friend's kind face. Thank you, Michael, for everything, for the promise, for the friendship, for showing me what really matters. Thank you for showing me what loyalty looks like, what love looks like, what friendship looks like. That night, Lewis slept better than he had in weeks. The championship hurt was still there, but it felt smaller somehow, less important, because he had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Some victories can't be measured in points or trophies. Some promises matter more than any race, and some friendships are worth more than all the gold in the world. The bracelet on his wrist reminded him that he was already a champion in the eyes of the people who mattered most, and that was the only victory that would last forever. May 2023, Lewis Hamilton stood on the podium in Barcelona, Spain, holding his trophy high in the air. He had just won his 103rd Formula One race, breaking Michael Schumacher's all-time record of 91 wins that had stood for nearly 20 years. The crowd cheered louder than Lewis had ever heard. Photographers flashed their cameras. The British national anthem played for the 103rd time in Lewis's career. But all Lewis could think about was one person who wasn't there to see it. Well, not exactly. Michael Schumacher was watching from his home in Switzerland. The family had decided years ago to keep his recovery private. But Lewis knew Michael was always there in spirit for every race. After the podium ceremony, Lewis didn't join his team for the celebration party. Instead, he got in his car and drove straight to the airport. He had somewhere important to be. 3 hours later, Lewis knocked on the door of the Schumacher family home. Corinna answered with a huge smile. "Congratulations, Lewis. We watched the whole race. Michael was so excited when you crossed the finish line." "Where is he?" "In his study. He's been waiting for you all afternoon." Lewis walked through the familiar house toward Michael's study. He found his friend sitting in his favorite chair, looking out at Lake Geneva. At 54, Michael moved more slowly than before his accident, but his mind was sharp and his heart was full. "Hello, record breaker," Michael said with a grin. "Hello, old record holder," Lewis replied, hugging his friend. They sat together in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The study was exactly the same as it had been for years. 7 championship trophies, hundreds of photos, memories of a lifetime spent racing. "How does it feel?" Michael asked. "To have more wins than anyone in history?" Lewis thought carefully before answering. "It feels meaningful, but not for the reasons I thought it would." "What do you mean?" "When I was young, I thought breaking your record would prove I was the greatest driver ever. I thought it would validate everything I've done. But now that it's happened, I realize the record isn't about being better than you. It's about honoring what you taught me." Michael smiled. "Which is?" "That racing is just a job. Being human is the real work. And you've done both beautifully." Lewis pulled out a small box from his jacket pocket. Inside was a simple gold bracelet, identical to the one Michael had given him 2 years earlier. But this one had different words engraved on it. "Promise kept. MS to LH forever." "I had this made for you," Lewis said, fastening it around Michael's wrist, "to remind you that you kept every promise you ever made to me." Michael looked at the bracelet with tears in his eyes. "Lewis, Wait. There's something else I need to tell you. Something I should have said years ago." Lewis took a deep breath. He had been thinking about this moment for months, planning what he would say. When he finally broke Michael's record, that night at Ferrari, when I whispered in your ear, I told you part of the truth about what I wanted you to promise. But there was more. Michael leaned forward, listening carefully. The complete truth is this. I didn't just ask you to tell Anthony about my love and gratitude if something happened to me. I asked you to be my witness. Your witness? I asked you to remember that on December 15th, 2012, a scared young driver realized he had been chasing the wrong things his whole life. I asked you to remember that I learned, from talking to you, that family matters more than fame, that love matters more than trophies, that being a good person matters more than being a fast driver. Lewis's voice grew stronger and clearer. I whispered, "Promise me that if I ever forget what really matters, if I ever become someone who cares more about winning than loving, you'll remind me of this conversation. Promise me you'll help me remember that the only victory worth having is the love of the people who matter most." Michael's eyes were full of tears now, and I promised, "You promised to be my conscience, my reminder, my friend who would always tell me the truth, even when it hurt. Have I kept that promise?" Lewis smiled through his own tears. "Every single day. Through your accident, when you couldn't speak, but your presence reminded me what courage looks like. Through your recovery, when you showed me that real strength isn't about being perfect, it's about never giving up. Through your friendship, when you taught me that the greatest champions are the ones who lift others up." Lewis stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful lake. "Michael, I need to tell you something that I've never told anyone. Not Anthony, not my team, not even myself until recently." "What is it?" Lewis turned back to face his friend. "I don't want to race much longer." Michael looked surprised. "Why?" "Because I've learned everything racing can teach me. I've won more races than anyone in history. I've made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I've seen the world and met amazing people and lived an incredible life. But the most important things I've learned had nothing to do with racing. They came from friendships like ours, from watching you fight back from the impossible, from seeing Mick grow into his own person, from understanding that Anthony's love never depended on my lap times." Lewis sat back down next to Michael. "I want to spend my remaining years doing what you're doing now, being present for the people I love, making memories that matter, using whatever platform I have to help others, not just to win more trophies." Michael reached out and took Lewis's hand. "Lewis, do you remember what I told you that night at Ferrari? About what really matters? Family, friends, the people who love you when you're slow and old and forgotten." "That's right. And you know what the beautiful thing is?" "What?" "You're not slow yet. You're not old yet. And you'll never be forgotten. But the people who love you, we already love you for exactly who you are right now. Race or don't race, win or lose, we'll always be here." Michael squeezed Lewis's hand tighter. "But I want to tell you something else. Something I learned during my years of sleeping." "What's that?" "Time is the most precious thing we have. And the time you've given me, the time you've given my family, the time you've spent being a real friend, that's worth more than all the victories in the world." Lewis felt a warm peace settling over him. This was why he had driven straight here after his record-breaking win, not to celebrate with champagne and crowds, but to share the moment with the person who had taught him what victory really meant. "Michael, can I ask you one more favor?" "Anything." "When I do decide to retire from racing, will you be there? Will you help me remember that my value doesn't come from being fast, but from being real?" Michael smiled the biggest smile Lewis had ever seen. "I promise, but on one condition." What? Promise me that you'll keep racing as long as it brings you joy. Don't stop because you think you should. Don't stop because other people expect you to. Stop when your heart tells you it's time, and not a moment before. I promise. They sat, together as the sun set over Lake Geneva. Two champions, two friends, two men who had learned that the greatest race isn't the one you run on a track, but the one you run through life, trying to be worthy of the love people give you. Thank you, Lewis said quietly. For what? For keeping the promise, for being my witness, for reminding me every day that being fast is nothing compared to being human. Michael looked at his friend with eyes full of love and pride. Thank you for showing me what loyalty looks like, what friendship looks like, what it means to never give up on someone, even when they can't give anything back. As the last light faded from the sky, Lewis understood that this was the moment the promise was truly complete. Not when he broke the wins record, not when he helped Mick or reconciled with Anthony, but right now, sitting with his friend, understanding that some victories last forever because they're built on love instead of speed. The final words Lewis had whispered to Michael 11 years ago in that Ferrari garage weren't really about death or accidents or racing at all. They were about life, about choosing to be human in a world that often rewards being ruthless, about finding people who see your heart instead of just your helmet. And in that quiet Swiss evening, with a gold bracelet on his wrist, reminding him that promises kept between friends can change the world, Lewis Hamilton finally understood what it meant to be truly fast. It meant racing toward the people you love, not away from them. We'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. It's amazing to connect with viewers from all around the world who appreciate stories of friendship, courage, and the power of never giving up. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, please hit that like button. It really helps us reach more people who could benefit from hearing these inspiring true stories. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We're constantly sharing fascinating stories about real people who show us what it means to be truly human. From athletes to everyday heroes, we bring you stories that will make you laugh, cry, and believe in the goodness of people. Most importantly, please share this video with your friends and family. In a world that can sometimes feel divided, stories like this remind us that kindness, loyalty, and love are universal languages that connect us all. When we spread these stories, we spread hope, awareness, and the reminder that being human is our greatest achievement. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.